This is written by Murphy. I'm Murphy Daly, and this video I'm going to talk about Walden by Henry David Thoreau. This is part of my series, The Immigrant's Guide to American Literature, and I'm first going to talk about the actual book and then about its place in history. This book is a series of 18 essays, and they run very much like a narrative, so it's basically a book, right? It is a true book, a nonfiction book about Henry David Thoreau's life when he decided to do an experiment of living off of his own work, growing his own food, living in a house that he built for himself, and what it would be like to live close to the earth. It's very famous for this quote. This is one of the quotes from it. He says, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live that. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And, if it proved to be mean, why then, to get to the whole and genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world, or if it were sublime, to know it by experience, and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion." Oh my Lord, that's a long sentence, okay? And actually, this book is, of its time, actually kind of accessible, because he begins by talking very specifically about his building of a house. He talks about the exact dollars and cents of what it took to build this house that he lived in. He talks about the dollars and cents of what it took to feed himself, because he tried to grow he grew his own food, and he was very practical. This reminds me of Benjamin Franklin's autobiography a little bit, being very distinct, like, this is happening. That particular passage that I read, that's not practical. That's like really way out in your mind. What are you thinking? But so he's there. He's part of the group called the Transcendentalists, which, transcending the reality and practicality of life. But he is saying, get down to the bottom of it, get to the very specifics of what life is about. So he does it. He has 18 essays where he talks about what he lives, what he does to live. He talks about the passage of time, the seasons. He talks about sounds and solitude. He talks about spring, brute neighbors, the pond in winter animals. And he lived there for a little more than 2 years. So he really spent some deep time paying attention to what nature, what the world had to offer. And he talks about it specifically. This is a plant, and this is the weather. And he also accordions out, or telescopes out, to say, this is us, this is our place in the world, which is part of what the Transcendentalists were about. Transcendentalists, and he was also about self-sufficiency, to live by his own means, grow his own food, and live alone. He discusses, to my delight, books. One of his essays is called Books, and he talks about, or no, it's called Reading. He talks about the types of books that are useful. He talks about questioning whether we need to read the same books that our parents have read. He says, maybe we don't need to keep reading these books just because other people have. We should think about new books. That's part of what Thoreau himself did and his friends, the Transcendentalists, did, as they went outside the usual Greek and Latin and read German Romanticists, they read Indian, they read the Bhagavad Gita, which was kind of new at the time. And similar to some of the romantics, the pre-Victorian romantics of England, he really noticed the plants and life around him. One of the things I like in this story, as a passage I read to you was talking about, that was a heck of a sentence, let me just say. He also has a sense of humor. He has a part where he talks about ants battling each other and how they were victorious and they fought and they dismembered each other because he looked at them, the red ant and the black ant, and they fought and they were victorious and brave and they were on the battlefield. He says, there are histories of the ants and their massive battles and who won. There are not histories of ants. He's being funny. He's poking fun at this. And it's very dry to say there are history books of ant battles, but it's poking fun also at people, saying, what are you doing? Tracking these military histories. Is it really that much better than an ant battle? I'm interpreting it that way, but it's kind of funny. He's poking at it. And that's something that is unique for this book in in his other Transcendentalists too. He adds some dry humor that you don't find in the other Transcendentalists. So this book, which was written in 1854, kind of close to the Civil War, right? So he's not engaging in what's happening. Whoops, did I slip into history already? Let me just finish about the book itself. Sentences at that time were pretty huge, but he is actually more approachable than other Transcendentalists of this time. This is philosophical. It's practical and philosophical, and therefore really a good example of what the Transcendentalists are up to. He lived there for 2.5 years, and you think, can you just throw up a house somewhere? Well, no, he got permission from his friend and mentor, Emerson, who is the major Transcendentalist. And on Emerson's land, he built this house. It was not super popular when it was first published, but it became really popular. Now we're getting into history. It became really popular in the 20th century and a big inspiration to the DIY people, the self-sufficiency people, the hippies, the people who wanted to build their own communes and live off the land. This is their huge inspiration. In fact, the cartoon Doonesbury mocked or had a Walden puddle, because Walden is the name of the pond that he lived by. I'm sorry, I forgot to say that. So that's why he called it Living by Walden. He called it Walden. Now, the history of the Transcendentalists. We know, we've tracked this throughout American history. So it starts with the Puritans, and they are rebuilding society. This is very American. New England, this is new, we're going to rebuild society, forget everything that was before, we're going to redo it ourselves, right? Way back in the very first European landing here in America. And this is New England too. He's in Massachusetts, very New England. And so this same thread is happening. He's like, I'm going to do it my way, but I'm going to redo the new way. Forget the New England. I'm going to redo it in this whole other, transcendentalist way. I'm going to think about how I want to interpret things. So they're redoing it again. Emerson was part of a movement that was rejecting this Calvinist Puritan idea, and he went into the Unitarian, which is another denomination that is kind of an outgrowth of this rejection of Puritans, and Unitarian wasn't enough away, and he started this transcendentalist thing, which was very heady. So Thoreau was one of his disciples. Clearly, dude gave him a plot of land to go live off of for 2.5 years. And that was part of these recurring themes. The individualism. So not just individual, like feeding yourself, but feeding your own mind from your own choices. They were looking into Indian mythology, which was new. They were looking into all the places that they could get inspiration. They were looking at nature itself. In fact, one of the beautiful quotes is, there is heaven, I'm probably paraphrasing, but there is heaven below us as well as above us. They're saying, don't only take what you're given. Find it out for yourself. Look at the ground. Look at what's here. It's interesting. This was happening in America just before the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act came from Lincoln. But the Homestead Act, I am so familiar with it. Americans could go into the West and just build their home and civilize or cultivate the land and live there. Well, that was happening, but it wasn't legalized sort of until the Homestead Act. But that was already happening. People had this idea. They weren't the heady thinkers of the Transcendentalists exactly, but they're like, yeah, go out there, live, figure it out, make it on your own. So this is a very American book, very American ideals in both the practical dollars and cents and the original thinking, that the rejection of received wisdom and the exploration of their own ideas. This is very, very American. And it was so American, it was like a seed. This book was like a seed that was planted that did not germinate fully until the 20th century, when people were ready for it. As I keep saying, it is actually one of the most approachable transcendentalist book. I'm going to do a video later about Emerson. Oh my gosh. His books, like, you can read them a sentence at a time. That's about it. But this book does go through. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. I really recommend it because it's very relevant to life in America. It's got a lot of these ideals that we aspire to, that Americans aspire to, don't necessarily live up to, but it's definitely a book that explains what America thinks it should be. Oh, one other thing I should say. He is privileged. He's very privileged, this guy, Thoreau. He has a friend that just loans him land for 2.5 years. What? That's crazy. And he just happens to have all these wonderful books, and he can dilettante his way around saying, oh, I just lived off doing day labor and it's fine just to not worry about life or clothes or things. It's better to get rid of things because things just need to be dusted. Yeah, fine. And his friends can come by and take him out to restaurants for dinner while he says, oh, things. So yeah, that's part of it too. He's super privileged. He's one of the fancy people that can play with being dirt poor and come out of it again and say, well, that was fun. So yeah, that's part of it too. And unfortunately, that's kind of American, maybe human. I don't know. So let's not ignore that. He has a couple mentions of African Americans, slaves in the community, which was happening at the time. Just small things. There wasn't a lot of that in Massachusetts. It wasn't as prevalent as in the South, but it's kind of dipping into that just a little. And this is one of those stories happening right before the Civil War. It was published 6 years before the Civil War, and when the Civil War happened, that kind of took a lot of the attention of everybody. So I'm not surprised it kind of went underground for a bit, because people are like, yeah, we're going to worry about surviving right now rather than sucking marrow out. All right, that's my lecture on Walden. It's really worth reading, and it shows a lot about what America thinks it needs to be. I'd love to hear your comments. Thank you so much.